I want to do work from a passage, Mark 10. If you'd like to follow along, I'm sorry we didn't have it in the bulletin. I'm actually just kind of got finished here in the last 10 minutes before church. It's been a busy week. And it's on the subject of divorce, but it's more than just about divorce. And I don't want to concern anybody. If you're here and you're divorced, God has granted grace to all of us. And so we want to approach this with the knowledge that we're going to approach it with understanding and with grace, because all of us need to experience God's grace in one way or another. Divorce and remarriage is a pretty common thing these days. And it's not often talked about anymore in the church. I'll be honest, I can't remember just exactly when I heard a sermon last on problems with divorce, or a topic on divorce. It's been so long. But that's what we're going to kind of look at. And then I'm going to give you, as a counselor, a little bit of my perspective, how not to get divorced. Because that's kind of what we want to do. And all the hands, those of you who are married or have been married, you got married to get divorced, right? Let's see the number of hands. Of course not. Nobody gets married to get a divorce. That would be ridiculous. So we want to take a look at this. If you're not married, if you're a teenager or a child, you've got friendships, right? Some of those friendships are going to be successful. Some of those aren't. Why are some of those not successful? How is it that you became a friend and then later on actually maybe even became an enemy? How did that happen? Well, I've got some ideas about maybe what happens and takes place. So let's look again by looking at Mark 10, starting with verse 2. Some Pharisees came, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hard-heartedness, he wrote this commandment to you. For from the very beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." As I was reading this passage, in the question that the Pharisees decided that they were going to test Jesus on, I found that just slightly bewildering, because the Pharisees already know just exactly about the law of Moses. Jesus seems to be very adept in being able to quote scripture, and he too knows the different passages, and he knows, of course, obviously, about Moses and why Moses wrote what he did. But they look at this as a challenge, and I'm not really sure just exactly why they thought that this was going to be such a great challenge. I don't know if it had to do with the society of the day. Were men and women divorcing? I should say, were men divorcing their wives because a wife could not divorce her husband? She didn't have that right or privilege. Was this a very common thing? And there's an aspect of which scholars believe that that's the case. Matthew says, is it permissible to divorce a wife for any reason? Well, she burnt supper. So is that a good enough reason? Well, I don't know. But they're dealing with this question about divorce, and so they begin to challenge and ask Jesus about that. And he makes it explicit that Moses wrote this stuff because of your hard heart. Basically, your unwillingness to do the will of God. That marriage from the very beginning was designed as a lifetime experiencing event, a behavior, an action. But they've chosen and many have chosen not to follow through. Now, there's another aspect to this question, and we can see it down then in verses 11 and 12. But the assumption here is, that's being made, is if you divorce, then you're probably going to get remarried. And this would be especially true in Jesus' day. And the Pharisees would obviously have to think about this and know this. And this becomes a problem because, in fact, then it takes us to that realm and that question of, is it okay to divorce without leaving that other part out? Well, if I divorce and I remarry, what does that mean? Well, we already know that means that if you divorce and are remarried, then you committed adultery. And so Jesus is consulting that in verses 11 and 12. Part of the problem for the Pharisees as they think about this question that comes about, and it's very much a concern, is that in their particular day, it was very uncommon, first of all, for a man to be single, but especially for a Pharisee. And for a Pharisee, he gets married for just several reasons, probably like many other men at that time, is that he needs, one, somebody to bear his legitimate children. All of us know the different stories of the Bible that talk about the blessings that come from God related to the bearing of children. And so not to have children could mean what then? Well, it might mean kind of a negative. So he needs a wife to bear him legitimate children. But of course, as a man, we know that we need women around to do those domestic things, right? Fetch us a pail of water out there at the well. Get my laundry done. Cook for me. And whatever else would have been required of a woman of that day. These are the things that a Pharisee at that particular time would expect. So it becomes a problem. If you divorce your wife, the question would maybe become then, well, can I get remarried? Kind of thing. The problem also exists for the woman. She's in a bad situation. She's actually even a worse situation because socially and economically, she's not much more than a slave. She's given to her husband. It's not her choice. She's given to her husband. And she's not able to buy property, and she's not able to go out and find a job on her own, but she's basically totally at the submission and the words of her husband. And so it creates a problem for both persons. The Pharisees understand and know this whole business about adultery, and that comes with divorce, because remember in John 8, they come to Jesus with a woman who's been caught in adultery. Now, I always thought this was an interesting story. They come to Jesus with the woman. Well, where's the man? This woman couldn't be committing adultery by herself, so where's the man go? I guess he was a faster runner. I don't know. But according to Leviticus 20:10, the Pharisees point out to Jesus that they are to be punished, and that is by the process of being stoned. In other words, it brought about death to commit adultery. Jesus reminds them there that all have sinned. Everyone has sinned. And then he says to the woman who commits adultery, go and sin no more. I'm impressed by the compassion, the understanding that Jesus has toward the woman. There's probably a variety of reasons, but what it does say to me and what it speaks to me is how do we talk to each other and how do we think about sin? We have a tendency to think about these large sins and these little sins, okay? I remember the day when adultery, man, that was way up here. I could be a glutton, it was way down here, kind of thing. Matter of fact, I don't know if I ever heard a sermon called on gluttony, okay? But Jesus is so gracious in this particular case, and he just says, hey, I don't condemn you either. Go and sin no more. Do it different this next time. Make it work. Excuse me. So is divorce okay? Well, again, it leads us back to the assumption that, of course, we're going to remarry. Jesus, after these events, after talking about that, he goes on to talk about what is the real purpose, how were things designed, how they were supposed to be. And he talks about from the very beginning. That is the place to start, not where the Pharisees were at. The purpose was that a man would leave his father and mother and be united with his wife. And I find that so interesting after what I just said about women and men in that particular day. A man shall leave his mother and father. The first thing that comes to my mind is, well, wait a minute. Why doesn't Jesus say a woman should leave her father and mother and be united with her husband? You kind of see what I'm at here, is that it seems like there's something else that's taking place. And I'd like to just suggest that the reason that it's written this way is because it has to do with a man's need to have an allegiance toward his wife and not his family. At that particular time, families were kind of made up. You'll understand this word being from Virginia, part of the clan kind of thing. And so when they would get a wife, she'd be part of the clan. And your allegiance belonged to the clan, okay? Now, Jesus is saying something different. And you think about this in terms of the marriage, is that now it is the man who is leaving the clan and joining his wife. And what I'm simply saying by that is part of the image that I get here is that we have no other allegiance to any other person, that our allegiance is to our spouse, to our wife, to our husband. That is now where our allegiance lies. You know, unfortunately, I got to thinking about that, and I thought about stories or events when I've done counseling, and this business comes up. I'm surprised at the number of times that people will talk about the problems of friends and family interfering into the marriage and the kinds of problems that it has created. One couple came in and the guy said, you know, she's constantly leaving me. And I looked at her and I said, can you help me understand that, why you keep leaving? Well, my mom keeps telling me that he's not a good guy. And so she's still showing her allegiance to the clan rather than being joined, united with her husband in marriage, and that is where the allegiance now is. In-laws and family overstep their boundaries when they try to enter into another of family members' marriage. Second thing that Jesus tells us is that the plan of God for marriage is to create a new unit, one that becomes one flesh. When you hear that statement, one flesh, is there any things that jump in your mind? Because I find that different kind of behavior, and I think most people today would say, that's kind of confusing. What does that mean to really become one flesh? We can't just jump into one body kind of thing. Becoming one flesh. Well, it doesn't mean that we lose our identity as people. When we come together as individuals, and there's always that part of us that is always going to be an individual. I like to go fishing. My wife doesn't want to go fishing. I think a certain way. My wife thinks a little bit different way. Are we one flesh? Have we come together as one flesh? Well, this particular idea that joining and becoming one flesh isn't a losing of our individuality or our interest. That is not the point and the purpose of becoming one. But it is learning to live together in unity and purpose, creating a family, creating love and kindness toward each other as we go through this life. If we could do that, we're going to be successful. It's not making sure that one or the other thinks and does just exactly like we do. And isn't that how most arguments start? The reality is that I want you to think like me. And if you think something different, you are wrong. Isn't that kind of how we really think? Yeah. Yeah, it's not a possibility that I'm wrong. Well, that's true. I'm generally not. But, I kind of got sidetracked there in my own thought a little bit. So, what we're doing then is we're making a commitment to another person to work toward, in a sense, a common goal, a common purpose of living through this life. In the beginning, what does God say? It's not good for a man to be alone. Well, I think that's probably true today for a man or a woman. Some people are able to be celibate all their life, and that's great. My aunt used to say that that's actually a gift. She was celibate all her life. She says that was a gift to her. I don't know what that would have been like. It would have never worked for me, but for her, it seemed to make a lot of sense. Well, I want to make a couple suggestions as I thought about divorce and about counseling. And I don't see those far apart. Sometimes it is, depending on who you're talking to. But this is about making a lifetime commitment, because that's what we're really after is that nobody wants to go through a divorce. I mean, I see people in the counseling office that are divorced. I see the fights that still go on. I've got a couple, and I actually only see her anymore. I never saw them together, but they have been divorced for 5 years, and they still continue to fight. The problem is that they have a 5-year-old child. And of course, like I tell anybody that comes to my office that talks about getting divorced and they have children, I said, the marriage will never be over. As long as you have children, the marriage is never over. And they're a prime example of 5 years and continue to still fight. The design was that this was to be a lifetime commitment. And that's hard. I got to thinking about that when I was working at the sermon, and I thought back on my own marriage proposal that I gave to my wife. I was 21. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but we were at a drive-in movie. We had been together pretty much all day, kind of talking about marriage and a variety of other things, and we had kind of come to that point anyways that I was already thinking about marriage. But here was the part that scared me. It's for a lifetime. I'm 21. A lifetime. Now, the males in my family, and of course this doesn't mean that's going to be with me, but they all have lived up into their mid to late 90s. Okay? A lifetime. I was 21, but that's a long time. But I gave that serious thought because I thought, even right then, when I go into this, I want this thing to work. I don't want to have to go through a divorce. And so I committed. Well, I was saying that marriages aren't easy. I was watching a movie one time of a couple that kind of just got married out of the blue. They had just kind of met. And believe me, this kind of thing happens. I have had them in my office. They knew each other for 2 weeks. They decided to get married, thought this was a grand idea. Well, there's this couple in this movie. They out of the blue get married, and of course there's some financial problems, and things are going to court, and the judge is saying, I'm not going to let you out of this marriage until you try to make it work, because it's only lasted a couple weeks so far. And so he says, and to make sure that you do it, I'm going to send you to a counselor. And so the first time they go to the counselor, they talk about, oh, how lovely everything is. And the counselor says, hey, I'm no dummy here. I know what's going on. Okay, the next week they come back, and barely can they get through the door. They're pushing and shoving, and they're getting in there, and they're screaming and yelling at the counselor about, he's doing this, and she's doing that, and oh, he's a man animal, and so on and so forth. And the woman, the couple stops, and the counselor says, now this sounds like a real marriage. Well, I hope that it's not always that bad, that there's some really good things, but yeah, those kinds of things are going to happen. But I want to give you, as a counselor, I want to give you just a little piece, and I mean it is very little, that I feel like is so important. When I see clients, I know that there's usually three top things, and there's others, but the three top problems that I oftentimes see and have to address in counseling situation is money, sex, and communication. Those three things seem to be at the top of the list in general. There are some other things, but those are the three main ones that are oftentimes brought up. And I discovered kind of as I progressed in my therapy that as I began to think about all these different problems that we have in marriage, is I've come to the conclusion that the problem really lies a lot in the ability to communicate in an effective, loving, caring way. There's nothing like being very emotional and getting in an argument, because people say things that they generally wouldn't say. They act out and do things they generally wouldn't say. And so, interesting enough, when I ask people, well, what are your goals for therapy? I would say 90%, actually even, tell me we don't know how to communicate. Wow, 90% tell me they don't know how to communicate effectively. I agree with them, because I'm there and I listen, and I hear what they have to say. The problem is they are not listening to each other. They're talking at the individual. They're not listening to what their spouse is telling them. And so what I want to tell you is that if you want to be an effective listener, you have to listen to what the individual's telling you. And you have to listen for more than just words sometimes, because there's meaning behind words that we say. I tell people, okay, you explain to him or her about how you feel. Now this is about your feelings, about how you feel, not about what he does. And so she explains it. And then he's surprised when I'd say, tell me what she just said. How many people you think can actually tell me what they just said? Some are completely dumbfounded. Some can make a couple words out that's audible. But in general, it's hard to find people at that point when you surprise them like that and say, tell me what they just said. But it gets to the point of the problem, or however you want to put that, that people aren't listening to what you're saying. What are they doing? They're planning their attack. Remember, this is a time of high emotion, of disagreement. And so they're going to fire back, whether it has to do with what they just said or not, because they haven't listened and tried to understand, which is very peculiar, remember? This is the person that I said that I loved, that I cared about, that I chose to marry, that I chose to live with, and yet I treat them like my enemy. I think maybe all of us have experienced that, even here. That we have treated each other, our spouse, our friends, as if they were somehow our enemy, rather than, if I may say, our lover, kind of thing. Yeah. Learning to listen is an important aspect of keeping a relationship healthy. The second thing that I've always noticed about this whole business and counseling is that the ability or the willingness or just right out, I don't know, whatever, where people use personal attacks. Think about the fact, who knows you best? Well, I suspect your spouse does, right? Or your closest friends. And unfortunately, because we know them so well, we know their weaknesses. There's particular words that I don't want to have to hear in a disagreement, okay? I already know that. My wife has known it because we've been married 40 some years. So she doesn't use those words, okay? I suspect it's probably true to you, but people pick up on that stuff and they'll use against the person they say that they love. And it becomes a personal attack. This is not productive. It doesn't help solve the issue. It only escalates the situation into more and more aggressive behavior. I use this example with men, and men get it really quick in my office because we're all within six foot of each other in my office. And I tell them about how the problems of aggression, and I say, okay, you and me, we're angry at each other because something happened, and I'm telling you, and you're telling me, and the first thing through all this emotion, I jump up out of my seat, and I literally jump up out of my seat. I stand over and point him like this, and I said, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to be out of my seat. And in essence, that's kind of what happens, that when we become aggressive in conversation with the people that we love, what are they going to do? They are going to oftentimes match us. If I become aggressive, they're going to become aggressive. They're going to try to match me. And so now, the more and more that happens, the further away we get away from the issue. Because now other things are beginning to get thrown in when we become aggressive. And when we become aggressive, people start to yell. Some people do the silent treatment. Some people give the cold shoulder. Some people begin to use vulgar language. Some use threats, and some even act on those threats by using physical violence. Stick to the issue that you're talking about, okay? And again, remember, this is the person that you love and that you care about. Don't sweep the issues under the rug. It doesn't exist. You can't do it. The first or the next time or next month you get into an argument and a debate about your relationship and about the problems that exist in your marriage, I guarantee you that rug is going to come up and everything that's under there is going to fly out. I've seen it happen over and over again. We pushed it under the rug. We let it go. It doesn't exist. It will come back to get you at a later date. Deal with your issues one at a time. Because when you reach under the rug and they all come flooding back out, you have lost the present issue among many issues and nothing is ever resolved. In the counseling situation, I have to be a little directive every once in a while because the couple will start talking and they'll go back and forth like that and bring this stuff up. And I have to say, wait a minute, we have to stop. You do this at home, here we want to try something different. And so I try to begin to work at some of these skills so they can actually really listen to each other. But there is so much stuff sometimes. It is so hard to separate it all out at that point. It's almost like needing to start all over again. Stay with the issue, take care of it. What is that passage that I think that's in there somewhere that Paul says about something about not letting the sun go down on your anger? Is that how it goes? That makes a lot of sense to me. The idea is to take care of it. Don't wait till later down the road to try to deal with it. Take care of it now while you can both be focused and focus on that and take care of that. Lastly, I want you to remember that there is more than one way to think. And unfortunately, most of us don't believe that, really. Because that's why we are so convinced that we are right and you're wrong. The way that I am thinking is right. Is it possible that maybe the way you're thinking is not always right? Is it possible that there are several ways to look at a particular issue that comes up between you? I think there is. But you have to be willing to work at it. You have to put these other things in the steps of not attacking, of listening, of not trying to sweep it under the carpet. You have to take these things and you look at it and you discuss together, what are the things that we have in common in this? What do we understand? As I listen to you, I hear you telling me this. This is how you feel. I can't tell you not to feel that. Anybody ever tell you you shouldn't feel that way? Oh, come on. Really? I shouldn't feel that way? People are entitled to how they feel. And they're going to share that with you if you give them opportunity and to begin to understand them, and it might help you to understand it, how they got to where they're at. I'm asking you to be a little counselor here, okay? I sit there and I listen for what they're telling me. Not just by the words, but what they're really telling me in this whole thing. There's more than one way to look at life, to look at situations. Successful marriages are not won by arguments, by battles, by sweeping it under the rug. It is by listening, understanding, kindness, and respect. I invite you this afternoon when you go home to take a look at 1 Corinthians 16, we call the love chapter. And it's just that little short portion. Excuse me? 13, I'm sorry. It's just that kind of a short paragraph. Notice in there that when it's talking about love, it actually only uses two things where it talks about love is patient, love is kind. After that, now there's 8 things that love isn't. Boy, isn't that something? You'd suspect that there would be a lot of things to tell us about what love is. But the writer, he only points 2 of those out, but he tells us 8 things that love isn't. A pastor told me one time he believes that when we have arguments or disagreements, that it's possible to work in such a way that we both can be winners. I've remembered that since I've been 21. I haven't always done a good job at it. But I think that there is an aspect of truth in that. I have to want my wife to be a winner. I want to be a winner, don't I? Why would I not want my wife to also be a winner? Why would I not to bring things to a resolution where we can both walk away feeling good rather than thinking, I won the battle. I told her. Yep, I told her I won. That's the way the world thinks. We can't work at our relationships in that way. We can only accomplish a lifelong commitment when we show respect and understanding and speak to each other out of words of kindness, love, appreciation, respect. And we can only do that as if we're willing to put it to practice. So I encourage you, as you go forward in your relationships, to try to remember some of those things. And to remember that you're not always right. You've got an opinion. But how do I want this to end? Let's pray together. Our Father, we give you thanks that you have shown us truly how and what it means to love. And we confess that we oftentimes fail in doing that. I pray that you would renew our minds to think and to consider and to act differently according to the scripture of respect and love and kindness. And Lord, help us in those times of high emotion, that we might be able to somehow seek your peace, your presence in the midst of us as we work on our life together as couples. Continue to bless each one here and the marriages that are here, the friendships that people have, that they might be good, that they might be wholesome, that they might bring us joy and meaning and purpose. purpose to our life. So we give you thanks for those things in Christ's name.